March 26, 1986. It's a Wednesday morning in Tacoma, Washington. The kind of morning that feels completely, unremarkably safe. A 12-year-old girl chains her bike to a rack at a small neighborhood park. She set paper bag lunches on a picnic table for her younger sisters. She's responsible like that, the kind of kid who thinks ahead. She looks around for the girls, doesn't see them, and heads down a trail into a wooded gulch to find them. She is never seen alive again. Her name was Michella Welch. She was 12 years old. Petite, with long blonde hair and glasses. She was the kind of big sister who took her younger siblings to the park on a Wednesday just because she could. That morning, she had brought them to Puget Park in Tacoma's North End around 10 a.m., then rode her bike home at 11 to make them lunch. When she came back, she chained her bike, set the lunches out, and went looking for her sisters, who had slipped away to use the restroom at a nearby business. By 1:15 in the afternoon, her sisters came back and couldn't find her. They played near a cave under the Proctor Bridge for another half hour. When they returned to the table, the lunches were there. Michella's bike was there. Michella was not. By 3:10 p.m., officers were on the scene searching the park. It wasn't until 11:30 that night, more than 10 hours later, that a tracking dog found her body in a makeshift fire pit area, deep in the gulch. She had been beaten, sexually assaulted, and killed. In broad daylight. In a neighborhood park. While her sisters played 100 yards away. Tacoma held its breath. Parents pulled their children inside. The city's North End, quiet, working class, the kind of place where kids roamed free on bikes, would never feel quite the same. Police formed a 6-person task force. More than 10,000 investigative hours went into the case in 1986 alone. Thousands of tips were investigated. Composite sketches were circulated. A 13-year-old classmate told detectives he'd seen a man lingering under the Proctor Bridge that day watching the girls. That man was never found. Weeks passed. Then months. No arrest. No answers. Just a city waiting and grieving. But that's not where this story ends. 5 months later, same city, same summer, it happened again. August 4, 1986. 13-year-old Jennifer Bastian left her home at 2:30 in the afternoon to ride her bike 30 blocks to Point Defiance Park. She was training for a YMCA bicycle tour in the San Juan Islands. Before she left, she put a note on the counter. She'd be home by 6:30. She didn't come home. Her family called police that evening. An extensive search of the park was conducted. No trace of Jennifer was found. Hundreds of volunteers combed the trails. The park, thousands of acres of old-growth forest perched above Puget Sound, gave up nothing. 3 weeks later, on August 28th, a group of joggers detected a strong odor near 5 Mile Drive. They found Jennifer's body hidden in the underbrush, her bicycle nearby. She had been raped and strangled. 2 girls. 1 year. 1 city. Both on their bikes. Both headed somewhere ordinary, somewhere safe. Their age, their appearance, the circumstances of their disappearances, the similarities were impossible to ignore. Tacoma didn't just grieve. It panicked. A serial killer, people whispered. Someone was hunting their children. Lindsay Wade was 11 years old that summer, just a kid in Tacoma herself. I just remember it was really scary to me as a young girl, she would say years later. There would be certain times where if I was out riding my bike, it would be something I would think about. Parents stopped letting kids out alone. The parks went quiet. And police, now staring at 2 murdered girls within 5 miles and 5 months of each other, poured everything they had into finding answers. They wouldn't find them. Not for 30 years. 2 girls. 1 year. 1 small city. And a mystery that would haunt Tacoma for decades. Stay with me, because what investigators discovered next would shock even the most seasoned detectives on the case. To understand what happened in Tacoma in 1986, you have to understand Tacoma itself. Tacoma felt safe in 1986. Kids rode bikes alone. Parents trusted the parks. But within 5 months, 2 girls would disappear and that sense of safety would never return. After Michella Welch's body was found on the night of March 26th, Tacoma police moved fast. A 6-person task force was formed. More than 10,000 investigative hours went into the case in 1986 alone. Thousands of tips were investigated. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood, interviewed witnesses, and collected whatever physical evidence the scene had left behind. There was one critical piece: DNA recovered from Michella's body. But in 1986 there was no national database to search. What investigators had was a killer's biological signature, and no way to match it to anyone. A 13-year-old classmate told them about a man he'd seen watching the girls from under the Proctor Bridge that day. That man was never found. Tips were followed. Leads were chased. Suspects were looked at and released. The task force pushed hard, and then, slowly, the pressure of new cases began to compete for attention. Resources shifted. The binders multiplied. And the name Michella Welch moved, not from anyone's memory but from active file to cold case. 5 months after Michella, Jennifer Bastian vanished from a park 3 miles away. The community didn't need a press conference to connect the dots. 2 girls. Blonde. Similar ages. Bikes. Parks. Tacoma's North End. The math was obvious and terrifying. Fear washed over Tacoma. Children who used to have free roam were no longer allowed to go out alone. Parents who had grown up in the era of open neighborhoods, of bikes left unchained, of be home by dinner. They stopped. They drove their kids. They stood at the end of driveways. They watched. A city that had believed it was past the worst of it, past Bundy, past that shadow, discovered that the shadow had never left. Police poured resources into Jennifer's case. Hundreds of volunteers joined the search. For 28 days her family waited. Her mother, Patty Bastian, refused to stop hoping. When the detective finally came to the door on day 28, then he told her they had found Jennifer out of Patty's hand and had her sit down. Hidden in a structure of sticks and fern leaves. Her bicycle concealed nearby. Police now had 2 murder cases, eerily similar, geographically close, temporally adjacent. The working theory crystallized almost immediately. 1 killer. 1 predator hunting children in Tacoma's parks. For almost 30 years they searched for that one person. They were wrong. But they didn't know that yet. For nearly 30 years the cases went cold. The DNA from Michella's killer matched nothing in any database. Jennifer's body had decomposed too much to yield usable evidence. Detectives kept the files. They ran the evidence again and again. No matches. Michella's sisters grew up. Jennifer's mother waited. The city moved forward, but the families did not. But there were people who refused to let that be the ending. In 2009, a Tacoma patrol officer named Gene Miller, who had been on the streets the year those girls disappeared, who had felt what it did to the community, became a detective and founded something new. He started the cold case unit at the Tacoma Police Department. Things have changed dramatically in how cases are investigated, he said. There's so much more that can be done. Miller began pulling in officers who had what he was looking for. Precision. The kind of stubbornness that doesn't stop at a dead end, it looks for a way around it. He found that in a detective named Lindsay Wade. Wade had come up through the ranks, patrol to narcotics, then to detective. Miller saw something in her immediately. She's got that grit, that determination, that commitment, that ability to fight through whatever challenges there are and just make things happen, he said. What Wade found when she opened the Michella and Jennifer files for the first time was staggering. Dozens of binders. Decades of police reports. She made a list of every man mentioned in those pages, every name connected to either case in any way. There were 2,300 names. 2,300. My working theory at that time was this guy has got to be somebody who's been convicted of a sex crime or another murder, Wade said. And somehow he slipped through the cracks. She worked through them. She ran the DNA from Michella's case again and again. Still no match in any database. And Jennifer's case had an additional complication. Her body had been so badly decomposed by the time it was found that investigators had assumed no DNA was recoverable. Jennifer's swimsuit had been found pushed down around her ankle, and the assumption for nearly 30 years was that it had been removed before any assault occurred. So no one had tested it. In 2013, on the advice of an expert panel from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Miller and Wade decided to test Jennifer's swimsuit anyway. And when the lab results came back, they found something. Male DNA. Preserved after nearly 3 decades. It was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. And what it revealed would change everything they thought they knew about 1986. For 27 years, they had been hunting one killer. What the DNA told them was something no one had expected. Stay with me. Let's go back to 2013. Detective Lindsay Wade is staring at a piece of evidence that has been sitting untouched in storage for nearly 3 decades. The swimsuit Jennifer Bastian was wearing the day she was killed. For almost 30 years, everyone had assumed that swimsuit held nothing useful. It had been found pushed down around Jennifer's ankle, and the working theory was that it had been removed before any assault occurred. So no one had tested it. On the advice of an expert panel at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Wade and Miller sent it to the lab anyway. The results came back. The lab discovered male DNA, preserved after nearly 3 decades. That was a big turning point in the investigation, Wade said. But what happened next stopped her cold. When they compared the DNA from Jennifer's swimsuit to the DNA already recovered from Michella Welch's case, it was different. For almost 30 years, they had been searching for one person who had killed both Michella and Jennifer. But that was wrong. There wasn't one killer. There were two. It was shocking, unbelievable, Wade later said, to have two crimes that were so similar, with similar victims and similar locations, within 4.5 months of each other and within 1.5 miles of each other. Two men. Two separate crimes. Two separate killers, who had never known each other, had no connection to each other, and had each hidden behind the assumption that there was only one of them. For the investigators who had spent years hunting a single predator, it was the most disorienting revelation of the entire case. And it meant they now had to run two completely separate investigations, simultaneously. Wade ran the new DNA from Jennifer's swimsuit through the FBI's national database. No match. It was another dead end, at least with traditional methods. But this was before forensic genealogy had become what it would become. In 2015, Wade contacted Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick, a forensic genealogy pioneer. Fitzpatrick's analysis of Jennifer's DNA pointed to one name, Washburn. Wade pulled the old binders. There he was, a tip caller from 1986, still in the files. By 2016, at the 30-year anniversary of both murders, Wade and her team announced there were two killers. They collected DNA samples from dozens of suspects. In March 2017, Washburn, living quietly in Illinois, handed over his sample without hesitation. On May 7, 2018, the lab confirmed the match. 3 days after that, police in Illinois arrested him. Robert Washburn had no previous criminal record. He had called in a tip about Michella Welch's case in 1986. He had voluntarily handed over his own DNA, and it had convicted him. While all of this was unfolding with Jennifer's case, the investigation into Michella's murder had while Jennifer's case was closing, the investigation into Michella's murder was heading toward its own breakthrough. In 2018, Detective Steve Riopel uploaded Michella's DNA to genealogy databases. The analysis identified a man named Gary Hartman, now in his late 60s. He had a clean criminal record and worked as a psychiatric nurse, less than 2 miles from where Michella died. Police needed his DNA, but they couldn't ask for it directly. Detectives began surveilling Hartman. They followed him to work. They waited. On June 5, 2018, Hartman left his job and went to a nearby restaurant for breakfast with a female co-worker. Detective Riopel followed them inside and sat at a table roughly 10 feet away. Riopel watched Hartman wipe his mouth with a brown paper napkin several times, then crumple it up and set it aside. When an employee cleared the table, Riopel retrieved the napkin. The lab tested it against the DNA from Michella's case. It matched. Hartman had reportedly already sensed police were watching him. He had told a coworker that 30 years ago he had done something terrible, and he thought he had been discovered. He was right. On June 20, 2018, Gary Hartman was arrested. A napkin, a breakfast, 32 years of running, ended in a restaurant booth. When the cases finally came to trial, the full picture of what happened in 1986 came into focus. For Michella Welch, prosecutors maintained that Hartman, then in his 30s, attacked Michella after she became separated from her sisters inside Puget Park. At the time of the crime, Hartman was struggling with severe addiction and mental illness. His defense attorney later told the court that he had essentially blocked the memory of what he had done, convincing himself for decades that he hadn't done it. He woke up at some point in the county jail, his attorney said, with the realization that he was the one who committed this atrocious act. After his arrest, Hartman had gone on living in Pierce County, less than 2 miles from Puget Park, for 32 years. He got sober in 1989, became a licensed nurse, built a life, all while Michella's family waited for answers. For Jennifer Bastian, Robert Washburn confessed in court that while Jennifer was riding her bike through Point Defiance Park, he grabbed her by the arm, dragged her into the woods, sexually assaulted her, and strangled her. He then moved to Illinois and spent the next 32 years living an ordinary life, until a name on a list and a DNA sample he handed over himself brought it all back. Two men. No connection to each other. Both hiding in plain sight. Both caught, finally, because science got there before they died. When Robert Washburn was arrested, Jennifer's mother Patty Bastian stood before cameras at Tacoma Police Headquarters and spoke for the first time in 32 years about what this moment meant. "We were overwhelmed by this 32 years ago and continue to be overwhelmed today," she said. "We never gave up on wanting justice. Tacoma never gave up on wanting justice for Jenny. And now, after all this time, justice is Jenny's." At Washburn's sentencing after his guilty plea, Patty addressed him directly. "Not a day went by in a normal way," she said. "You stole our holidays' birthdays?" Her daughter Teresa was less forgiving of Washburn's written apology. "He did not come forward," Teresa said. "He was caught by law enforcement." In March 2022, when Gary Hartman was convicted at his bench trial, Michella's family finally had their turn. Hartman, 70 years old, using a walker, sobbed in the courtroom as the verdict was read. "I'm so sorry," he said, head in his hands. "I'm so sorry. God knows I'm so sorry. That doesn't help. I'm just sorry." Michella's mother, Barbara Leonard, stood before the judge. "Michella was a happy child," she said. "She was also trusting. Too trusting." She looked at the man who had killed her daughter 36 years earlier. "I say lock him up and throw away the key. It won't bring her back. But justice will have been served." And then, in a moment that stopped the courtroom, Michella's sister Nicole Eby, one of the little girls who had been waiting in the park that day in 1986, spoke. "I'm thankful to say that through God's strength, I choose to forgive Gary Hartman," she said. "Because when I do not, it brings death to my life in one way or another." She paused. Forgiveness is not forgetting. But it is remembering without pain. Gary Hartman was sentenced to 26 years and 6 months in prison. The judge told him he would likely die behind bars. Robert Washburn received 27 years. Jennifer's mother considered it a life sentence. For the first time in 36 years, both cases were closed. 2 girls. 2 killers. 3 decades. 1 city that never stopped looking. The question now was, what did it change? And will it ever be enough? When a crime changes a community, it usually leaves 2 things behind: grief and a gap. The grief never fully heals. But the gap is where the law can move. Jennifer's mother, Patty, didn't stop. She spent 4 years testifying at the Washington State Legislature, pushing for a bill that would prevent killers from hiding in gaps of the DNA system. In May 2019, Governor Jay Inslee signed Jennifer and Michella's law. It requires DNA collection from everyone convicted of a felony in Washington state, closing the loophole that allowed both men to stay invisible for decades. 2 girls who rode their bikes to Tacoma parks in 1986 had changed the law for an entire state. As of today, both men remain incarcerated in Washington State Department of Corrections facilities. Given their ages and sentences, neither is expected to leave prison alive. Jennifer's sister Teresa rejected it flatly. "He did not come forward," she said. "He was caught by law enforcement. No appeals. No reversals. No dramatic last-minute legal maneuvers. Just 2 men in their 70s serving out the consequences of what they did on 2 ordinary days in 1986, and what they chose to hide every day after." There's a question that follows every true crime story, especially one that spans decades, and it's this: what do we do with it now? In the case of Michella Welch and Jennifer Bastian, the answer has been everything possible. Detective Lindsay Wade, the girl who grew up afraid in North End, Tacoma, went on to write a book about the investigation called In My DNA. After retiring from the police department, she joined the Washington State Attorney General's office as a senior investigator assigned to the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative. She founded the Washington State Cold Case Working Group in 2017, and has served on the National Institute of Justice Cold Case Working Group and the FBI VICAP National Advisory Board, teaching cold case investigation and child abduction response to law enforcement agencies across the country. The forensic genetic genealogy program she helped build has since assisted with more than 20 cold case investigations in Washington state alone, with multiple arrests and convictions resulting from techniques first refined on Michella and Jennifer's cases. The technology that found a name on a list, matched DNA on a decades-old swimsuit, and tracked a man's discarded napkin at a breakfast table is now finding killers in cases across the country. Every time forensic genealogy solves a cold case, every time a family gets a phone call with answers after 20, 30, 40 years of waiting, the thread traces back in part to 2 girls in Tacoma. As Detective Wade put it when the Bastian case was finally resolved, "I think a black cloud has been lifted in Tacoma. The murders became urban legends because it was just so horrific what was done to those girls. I think a lot of people were affected by both of those cases. A lot of people. A whole generation of children who stopped riding their bikes alone. A whole city that held its breath for 30 years. A detective who chose her career because of one unsolved case, and then solved it. Let me bring this back to where it started. A 12-year-old girl chains her bike to a rack at a neighborhood park. She sets out lunches on a picnic table for her little sisters. She goes looking for them in the trees. She is responsible and kind and trusting. A 13-year-old girl leaves a note on the kitchen counter. She'll be home by 6:30. She's training for a bike tour. She's thinking about the San Juan Islands. Neither of them had any reason to be afraid. That is the thing that sits with you after you learn this story, not just the horror of what happened, but the ordinariness of the moment before. The paper bag lunches. The note on the counter. The things that make you a kid in the middle of an ordinary Wednesday, an ordinary August afternoon. Michella Welch and Jennifer Bastian were stolen from Tacoma in 1986. They were stolen from their families, their sisters, their mothers who never stopped waiting. They were stolen from the lives they would have lived. The school years, the milestones, the ordinary Wednesdays and August afternoons that stretched out ahead of them. But here is what was not stolen. Their names. Their stories. The law that now carries their names in Washington state. The law that will help find killers before they hide for 3 more decades. The detective who grew up afraid in the same North End streets and turned that fear into 36 years of hunting. The families who stood in courtrooms and said things like, "Justice is Jenny's," and lock him up and throw away the key. And, perhaps most remarkably, forgiveness is not forgetting. But it is remembering without pain. A black cloud lifted over Tacoma. Not because the grief disappeared. It doesn't. But because people refuse to let those 2 girls stay in the dark. Detectives. Families. Scientists working with DNA strands thinner than a human hair. A mother who testified at the legislature year after year until the law changed. They did not forget. And because they didn't, others won't be forgotten either. Michella was 12. Jennifer was 13. They went to the park on a spring morning and a summer afternoon, and they never came home. But their names are on a law now. Their names are in this story. And as long as people keep telling it, they are not forgotten. If this video meant something to you, if Michella and Jennifer's story stayed with you, the best thing you can do right now is share it. That's how these names keep reaching people who've never heard them. If you want to go deeper, Detective Lindsay Wade's book In My DNA is a first-person account of the investigation from the detective who cracked it. Link in the description. And if you're new here, subscribe because this channel covers the cases that deserve more than a headline. New video coming soon. I'll see you there.